Do you struggle to sleep at night? Perhaps it's because your partner needs something to combat their snoring problem. Are you confused about which supplements you should be taking? Do you want to find the right kind of exercise equipment for your home? Or maybe you're just looking for the best electric shaver. Which has hundreds of product reviews to keep you fit, eat well, sleep better, and everything in between. Just head to which.co.uk/health to read our expert insight and independent reviews. Get expert advice and recommendations to live your best life every day with Which.
There are three main options when it comes to what to do with your spare cash. Do you invest it, do you save it, or do you overpay your mortgage? Let's discuss in this episode of Which Money. Hello and welcome. I'm Lucia Ariano, and with me today I have senior data journalist Josh Wilson. Hello, Josh.
Pleasure as always.
Lovely to have you back. And also joining us again after just 2 weeks ago from the budget, Tom Selby, Director of Public Policy at AJ Bell.
Hello.
Welcome back. Now, Josh, you've been analysing the difference between saving your cash, investing your cash and paying off your mortgage. Very timely, given the announcements from the budget and the changes to cash ISAs. Shall we start there? What changed?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main change, the biggest change that came around in the budget on this was that basically the amount that you can save into a cash ISA, they reduced that annual allowance down from, it was £20,000 and now they've reduced it down to £12,000, although that's only for people under the age of 65, I believe. So if you're over 65, no worries, nothing will change for you. And this will take effect from April 2027.
And Tom, we spoke about this in our budget special episode. And the thinking behind it is it should encourage people to invest more. What do you think about that?
That's the theory, yes. So if you make it people less able to put their money in cash, then they'll have to do something else with the extra £8,000 of stocks and shares ISA allowance. We've looked at this through consumer research, and the evidence suggests that the impact it's going to have is going to be pretty minimal. So you'll have people who just choose to reduce the amount that they save, so just putting up to the £12,000 limit. You'll have people who choose to put their money into savings accounts which are taxed, which perhaps the Chancellor's fine with because it gets a bit of extra revenue. And you'll have people who go for NS&I bonds and things like that because they've just got no appetite whatsoever for investment risk. So it's only a really small sliver of people who might choose to invest for the long term rather than holding cash. And the price that we all have to pay for that is huge complexity in the ISA system, when Labour said before the election that they were going to try and simplify things. So to my mind, and I've ranted about this before, but the route they've gone down is the wrong route. It's real complexity for investors for very little tangible benefit.
Well, we will come back to ISAs as we go through. But first, let's get straight to the topic of today. I mean, Josh, is there a simple answer as to whether you should save, invest, or overpay your mortgage?
So, funnily enough, there is sort of a simple answer to that. I will caveat that there are other things that you need to consider. But interestingly, essentially, when it comes to whether you should use your excess income every month to overpay your mortgage or save up into a savings account or invest that into financial markets, it kind of comes down to what is the highest rate. And that will determine which is, on paper, the best option for you. Now, the reason for this is essentially because if you have, let's say you've got a mortgage, right? And let's say the mortgage is, whatever length, 20 years, 30 years. And let's say your mortgage interest rate is 5%. Let's say that you were also to have a savings account that also paid you 5%. Mm-hmm. If you were to use, and let's say you had £250 per month, let's say, to either overpay your mortgage or to put into a savings account. Now, because the mortgage rate, 5%, is the same as the return you get from the savings account, 5%, if you were to put that £250 either overpaying your mortgage or saving into a savings account, the way the maths works is that actually you would get the exact same returns, whichever option you picked. So actually the best option, everything else being equal, is whichever is the highest rate wins. So if your mortgage rate is higher, it would be better off for you to overpay your mortgage. But if you can get a better rate on the savings market, you would make more returns saving up into a savings account. So it really comes down to which is the highest rate that you can get. Now, there are other things that can affect which would be the right decision for you, which we'll get into a little bit more in a minute.
Well, let's get into it now, shall we?
Sure.
What are the pros and cons then? Rates to one side. What else would you be considering?
So rates to one side, the other things to consider would be tax would be the main one. Essentially, overpaying your mortgage is the savings you make from it are tax-free, essentially, because what you're doing is you're overpaying your mortgage, which reduces the overall length of the mortgage term. So you'll be paid off quicker, you'll be out of debt quicker, which reduces the overall interest payments that you would make. And those savings are essentially tax-free. Whereas if you were to save up into a savings account, let's say that you went with a savings account rather than an ISA, because ISAs are tax-free. But if you were to save into a regular savings account, if you went over your personal allowances, you would be liable for tax. So you'd have to factor that in if you were at risk, if you weren't using an ISA and you were at risk of breaching your personal allowances. That would be something, for example, that you would need to take into consideration. And then there's other things as well, like, for example, as you pay off your mortgage, you reduce the overall size of the mortgage, obviously. And then when you come to remortgage, if you've improved your loan to value amount, which is the size of your loan relative to the value of your property, you can then, when you come to remortgage, you could get a better deal from your provider, that's a point in favor of overpaying your mortgage. But then one more thing to consider would be, let's say, for example, you end up in some kind of personal emergency, you need quick access to funds. If you've been overpaying your mortgage, you can't then just easily access, that money is gone, it's paid off into your mortgage. Whereas if you were saving instead, you could just liquidate your savings and use that for let's say, rainy day emergency.
We often talk about a kind of rule of thumb of how much we suggest people have saved away before they start investing or, overpaying your mortgage in this case. What is that for our listeners now?
So it will depend on the person. So the general rule of thumb that people use is 6 months of fixed expenses. So people's fixed expenses will be very different. Your fixed expenses, if you live in a 5-bedroom house in London, will be different if you live in a 1-bedroom flat in Middlesbrough, for example. So it will be the amount of money that you need to cover off emergency. So it will be different for different people. Another figure that gets bandied around is £10,000. I think that's just because it's a round number and it's easy to remember, but a chunk of cash that makes you feel comfortable that if something happens in your life that you're not expecting, you'll be able to pay for that thing and it won't kind of knock you off balance or force you to go and get high credit debt or something along those lines. So different for different people, but around 6 months fixed expenses is the kind of figure you should be looking at.
That sounds a lot better than just saying £10,000. It's
Yes.
quite arbitrary,
Number,
isn't it?
Yeah.
It's very important that you do have that rainy day fund in place before you even consider overpaying your mortgage. Make sure you've got that in place. And also another one as well is if you've got any other debts, make sure either that you've paid them off or that they are manageable. If you don't have a rainy day fund and if you've got outstanding debt that you're struggling with, it's not even a competition. Sort those out first.
And to go back to the question today of whether you should save, invest, or overpay your mortgage, Tom, do you think people are considering these options side by side enough?
So I guess you've got to be in a reasonably fortunate position, first of all, to be able to consider those options. I think anecdotally, quite a lot of people do. And I think actually it's quite a useful tool for people to think about whether they want to dip their toe into investing for the long term. Mortgages are quite tangible. People understand them. People are used to them. So this idea, as you set out, this idea of having the rate that you pay on your outstanding mortgage, this is the return I need to get in order for it to be worthwhile, either me holding a cash ISA, money in cash, or me investing for the long term is useful. So yes, anecdotally, I think people do consider these things, but generally, engagement in long-term investing is pretty low in this country. And I think things like that are a good way to bring it to life for kind of ordinary people, because often this idea of investing feels quite alien, I think, to ordinary people. And actually, if you bring it down to the brass tacks of this is, what you pay on your mortgage, this is what you get in a cash savings vehicle, and this is what you might get invested for the long term, clearly risks associated with that, then that's the kind of language that I think more people can understand.
And would you say that, nowhere near enough people then in the UK are investing at the moment?
So yes, is the kind of broad answer. So if you look at the statistics from the Financial Conduct Authority, there's huge numbers of people who've got £10,000 or more.
I think they say 7 million, is it? They say something like that.
In cash, who don't have anything at all invested. So if you take that £10,000 figure, and as I said, that's not the be all and end all, but if you assume that all of those people have got a rainy day fund, then at least a decent chunk of those people should probably be investing for the long term. Now, yes, you can make the choice of paying off your mortgage versus investing for the long term, but when you certainly think of the last 10, 15 years, mortgage rates incredibly low, actually for a decent chunk of those people, it would have made sense to invest rather than paying off their mortgage, because if you've got a rate of 2.5%, then you would hope over the long term your investments are going to outstrip that.
I think that's really key as well, particularly on the whole risk side of things. So when it comes to investing, if you're just trying to decide between overpaying your mortgage, saving or investing, when it comes to investing, yes, you can. You could get better returns on the investing for the long term in financial markets, but this it still entails some risk. Your money is still at risk. The value of your investments can go up or down. A lot of people prefer the certainty of either overpaying their mortgage or saving into a savings account because those are risk free. The returns are guaranteed. Returns when it comes to investing aren't guaranteed. And given that the mortgage market at the moment, interest rates on mortgages are much higher than they were a few years ago, makes it, it's a bit of a different conversation now to what it was a few years ago.
The one thing I'd say there is holding cash isn't risk free because of the impact of inflation.
That's
now,
true.
At the moment, the last few years we lived in this slightly weird period where actually you've been able to get cash rates that are higher than inflation. That isn't normal.
Yeah, that
won't continue to be the case. So yes, there are risks to investing, absolutely, and you need to be aware of those when you make those decisions. I think part of the kind of conversation that the industry needs to have with people a bit more is actually that there are risks on both sides. So if you hold all your money in cash, particularly if you've got it in a low or zero interest environment, then you are guaranteed to be losing money. So yes, there's risks of investing. Over the long term, usually you'll end up better off, but there's risks of stuffing all your money in cash as well.
The thing is as well, you don't have to go all in on any one of these options. You can mix and match based on your own personal circumstances. If you feel more comfortable, I want to overpay my mortgage by a little bit every month, but I also want to have, I want to put a bit into my savings account, and I want to invest a little bit into, let's say, a stocks and shares ISA. That is a perfectly valid approach.
Well, shall we start talking then about stocks and shares ISAs? And maybe to start with, how are they different to other types of investing?
So the main difference with the stocks and shares ISA is because it's in an ISA wrapper, you're limited into how much you can put into it every year. The limit is still £20,000 per year per person. But because it's in that ISA wrapper, it's completely tax-free. So no matter what gains you make, no matter how much dividends you make, none of that will be taxed. It's all tax-free.
I mean, is there anything you'd add to that?
No. So, those are the key benefits of ISAs. I guess if you're comparing them to pensions, then it's the flexibility as well. So, talked about the liquidity issue when you're overpaying your mortgage. There's a liquidity issue when you pay into a pension as well. So, yes, you get tax relief for paying into a pension. So, you get a bonus for saving in that pension, an extra bonus if you do it through the workplace. But the cost of doing that is that you can't touch the money at the moment until age 55. That's going to go up to age 57 in 2028, whereas ISAs are more flexible. So you can access the money whenever you want. If you're investing, you still want to be focused on the long term. So you generally don't want to be investing your money if your time horizon's anywhere lower than kind of 3 to 5 years. Yeah. But if you're looking to the long term, but the idea of having that safety valve is appealing, then ISAs do have that advantage that you can get the money if you need it.
And it would be great if we could give some real entry-level advice for the rest of the show. I mean, I feel like people would ask the question, well, where should I invest? I suppose it starts with, where do I start? But where should I invest? I mean, Josh, do you want to start us off?
Well, we can't really give like specific recommendations, but we can certainly give sort of like general pointers onto what's good practice when it comes to investing. And so, I would say definitely if you can, go for a stocks and shares ISA because it's in that ISA wrapper, so it's tax-free. And then your next step would be to pick an investment platform like AJ Bell, which is
good choice.
one of our which recommended providers. And then once you're signed up to an investment platform, you can then pick and choose your investments. Different platforms will have different options for what you can invest in. And it'll be things you can choose between shares, you could invest in funds, you could invest in exchange traded funds, bonds. A lot of people like to invest in. One of the easier things to get started investing in, I would say, would be some kind of fund, probably a tracker fund, which is basically a fund that has a basket of companies that is designed to track a particular index. Let's say like the FTSE 100, which is the biggest 100 firms on the London Stock Exchange. That's a FTSE 100. So there's quite a few different FTSE 100 trackers, which are basically a basket of funds that tracks the FTSE 100.
Yeah, and that's all absolutely right. I think one of the challenges that the industry has, I think, had in getting people to engage with investing is all of those things you said there, Josh. There's a huge amount of jargon in there that people wouldn't understand, and that's not your fault because those are the terms that are used. But I think that one of the off-putting things for people is that so they get to the point of, right, I think investing might be right for me. What do I do next? And then, do I invest in a bond? Do I invest in Tesla? Do I invest in this company, British Tobacco, whatever? And so I think the good news on that is that the industry, I think, is recognizing that as a challenge and is moving towards simpler solutions for ISA investors and pension investors. So AJ Bell and other platforms have the same thing. We have risk-rated funds, so you don't think that if you're going to invest, you need to sit there all day with 7 computer screens in front of you tracking the share price of all these different companies. It's not the case. You can pick a starter fund that's low cost that is matched to what you think your risk profile is. So it might be cautious. So you might think, I'm going to need the money quite soon, and actually I don't like the ups and downs of the market. It could be adventurous. So you think, right, actually I'm going to hold this money for a long time and I want the upside, and there's risk categories in between as well. So I think one of the key messages that we all need to get across to people is, yes, there's a lot of stuff involved in investing, and there is always going to be a lot of terms there, but actually it should be accessible to everyone, and there are solutions out there now that can help people, even if you don't want to spend all day kind of following companies and tracking markets.
Yeah, and I think it is a lot more accessible today, I think, to the average person than it was even a few years ago. And I would say as well, we have plenty of guides on our site to explain how investing works and how you can get started.
We can get a few links to those in the description of today's show. So I suppose then once you've got past the barriers of the jargon and maybe just not feeling like it's something that you can do and when it should be available to everybody, is it quite easy then to use a stocks and shares ISA? Would you say, when you sign up to a platform, is it the case that you'll answer a questionnaire and that will kind of point you to, if you're doing it DIY, is this kind of how it works? You answer a questionnaire, it'll assess what you're happy with, what kind of risk you're happy with, and go from there. Is it easy?
So not necessarily at the moment in terms of guiding people towards solutions. So there have been challenges for a long time around and this is very kind of inside baseball for the industry, but around the advice guidance boundary. So firms like AJ Bell and others have always been quite reticent about giving people too much personal information based on responses to questions and things like that, because that would risk moving from being guidance to people from a regulatory perspective to being advice. And AJ Bell doesn't offer advice, and lots of other platforms don't either. There are reforms coming down the track which are going to be in place from April next year, which will loosen those rules and allow firms to give more targeted nudges to people to help them make decisions, for example, to determine whether investing is right for them, and then the kind of fund, a risk-rated fund, for example, that might be appropriate. So up until now, that kind of help on an individual basis has been lacking, but there are reforms coming down the track that should make it easier for firms to give people a kind of a helping hand in what is quite an intimidating process.
Yeah, it's certainly, it's not the case yet that you could just go in blind and just expect to be able to do it all, you still kind of have to do some research, in terms of like exactly how you open a stocks and shares ISA, what exactly a fund is, and which ones you want to invest in.
And shall we bring fees in then? Because I don't think we really covered them much today. What kind of fees might you be looking to pay?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different fees that you will probably end up paying. The first one would be the platform charge, which is the fee that you pay to the investment platform just for being able to invest on that platform. And generally that will either be a percentage every year of the overall size of your portfolio. So if you had, say, £10,000, might be like a 1% fee on that, let's say. Otherwise, a lot of the time these days, it's just a flat fee. It might be like £20 a year, something like that. And that's just a fee that you will pay every year. The other fee that you're likely to have to pay would be ongoing fund fees. For, let's say you did invest in a fund rather than individual shares. Usually most funds, I think pretty much all funds, have a management fee associated with it, which again is usually a percentage of the value of the money you've got inside of that fund. So again, it could be like 0.1%, 0.5%. It really varies. But it's really important to look at those fees because, again, no matter how well or badly that particular investment does, you still have to pay those fees every year, and they do eat into your return. So it's important that you understand them and that you're finding the right funds for you, basically, that have the right kind of fees, because that's going to be like kind of a key determinant of like what your returns are at the end of the year, is what you're paying out in those fund fees.
Absolutely. It's the one thing that you can absolutely control when you're investing. So there's always going to be risk, there's always going to be uncertainty. Even if you go for a cautious fund, that's still going to be invested in things that could go up or down. But the charge that you pay, the fees that you pay, is the one thing you've got total control over. And as Josh said, there are different structures of fees, and there are different things that you can pay for depending on, for example, if you trade a lot or if you just want to buy one fund. But the good news is that over the last sort of 10, 15 years, those fees have really come down.
Yes,
it's a competitive market now.
And it's also worth pointing out that a more expensive fund doesn't necessarily mean a better fund.
Yeah, no.
You can get very successful funds at a very low price. That is definitely a thing.
Yeah, if you look at automatic enrolment, so if you've got an automatic enrolment pension scheme, the charge cap for that scheme, which is designed to protect people from high charges, is 0.75%. You can easily construct a diversified portfolio of investments for way less than 0.75% with most platforms in the UK.
And that point on diversification is important as well. Generally speaking, we wouldn't say that you should go all in on like one fund or one company. You really want to diversify your portfolio with, ideally several different funds that are diversified, say across different sectors or different financial markets from different parts of the world. Maybe throw in a few different shares in there if you want. It's also good to hold a bit of money in bonds as well. And, other commodities if you're interested, but diversification is really key.
Yeah, unless you're Biff from Back to the Future and you've got the almanac from the future, then absolutely don't stick all your eggs in one basket, because they'll end up getting splatted.
Oh, and the other fees that you might have to pay depending on the platform is trading fees as well, which is fees you pay each time you buy and sell a share or a fund. You may be liable to pay a trading fee, although they're usually pretty cheap when there are trading fees.
That's actually brought me to a question I was wondering, because how often, once you've got to this point and you've already invested, how often should you be checking and I suppose potentially thinking about whether or not you should be buying?
No, it's a good question, and I would say probably not every day. With this, we're not talking about day traders here, which is a completely different thing. I would say, check on your investments once a month, once every couple of months, and check your exposure as well. If you're unhappy with the balance of your portfolio, rejig things around. But you really don't want to be obsessively checking it every single day. We wouldn't generally say that's a good idea, because when it comes to investing, you should treat it as a long-term thing. It's a long game. You want to be investing over several years. So if you're checking it every few days and constantly buying, and so for one thing, you'll rack up loads of trading fees. So no, don't be checking it every day. Like once a month, once every couple of months is totally fine.
Yeah, I'd say maximum of that often. As you say, this is you should be investing for the long term, and the danger is if you keep checking in on it just to see and not doing anything on it is fine, but you should be prepared for the fact that if you check in even as regularly as like twice every couple of months, you might see gyrations down, you might see gyrations up. It's not something that you should panic or worry about or even necessarily act upon. You should be thinking into years, if not decades, rather than over the course of kind of a few days or months.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's worth saying that on a day-to-day basis, the financial markets can be quite volatile, but over the long term, if you look at long-term trends, financial markets overall have tended to trend upwards over time, which is why we always say investing should be treated as a long-term thing.
To end today, because we are wrapping up now, it'd be great if we could end with some actions for our listeners, maybe even real beginner investors. What advice would you give on steps really to take away from today's show?
As a first step, definitely check your rainy day fund. Make sure you've got one in place. Make sure it's that you could easily access it. It's like an easy access ISA, let's say, that you can access that money very quickly and easily if you need to in an emergency. Clear any outstanding major debts that you've got, or at least make sure they're under control. Don't be up to your eyeballs in credit card debt. That's definitely not what we want. But other than that, I would say, look into your mortgage, understand, what's your term. Really work out your budget, your monthly budget. That's a really good starting point. How much money have you got coming in every month? How much have you got going out? How much do you have spare after all your essentials, but also after your you want some leisure spending. So make sure you've got that budgeted. And then whatever you've got left, consider whether it's going to be right for you overpaying a bit to your mortgage so that you can pay it off quicker and that you'll have less mortgage interest payments to make. Consider a savings account. Have a look on the market. We publish tables of the best savings rates on offer. Have a look at those, and do some research into investing. Have another look at how stocks and shares ISAs works, and have a look at what the market is doing. If there's any funds that you think you'd be interested in putting a bit of money aside into.
Yeah, I think that budgeting point is really, really important, because I think that's often people will stick their heads in the sand like a mad ostrich, but actually it's just taking that first step of looking at what's coming in, what's going out, and making a clear-headed decision of can I afford to save or invest a bit of extra money? Because my sense from speaking to customers and social circles and that kind of thing is a lot of people will just stick it in the too difficult box and say either investing isn't for me or I haven't got enough money to do it, without actually going through what's going in and what's going out and actually just saying, is that true? Because even if it's 50 quid, 25 quid a month, something like that, over time,
it can make a difference.
That can add up to a significant pot of money and a significant pot of savings. So that if the one thing I always say to people take away is that it might be a bit anxiety inducing and a bit worrying, but get your bills out. Have a look at them, see if there's some stuff going out, some Netflix bill that you don't use or some other subscription that you don't use. See if there's any way you can save money. And actually, is there a bit of money that you can use to save and invest for the long term, starting off with that rainy day fund and then potentially transitioning to investing for the long term?
Because it really does make a difference, even a small amount of money. In the analysis that I did, I looked at putting away £250 per month, but I also looked at what would it do if you only had £50 per month, say, if you had a bit less. And it still works out, like, I'll use the mortgage overpayment example. You still pay off your mortgage, I think it was 2 or 3 years early, and save nearly £21,000 in interest payments. So it does make a difference.
That's a really nice, bright note to end on. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from Which, the UK's consumer champion. You can find plenty more advice about what we discussed today in the show notes. There you'll also find a link to become a Which member for 50% off the usual price, an offer exclusively available to you, our podcast listeners. Joining Which will not only give you access to our product reviews, our app, one-to-one personalised buying advice, and every issue of Which magazine across the year, but you'll also be helping us to make life simpler, fairer and safer for everyone. everyone. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you'll be notified whenever we release a new episode of Which Money, Which Shorts, or any other podcast that we make for you. And if you want to get in touch with us, then follow us on social media at Which UK or drop us an email to podcast@which.co.uk. See you next time.
If you're enjoying this podcast from us here at Which, then why not become a Which member? Right now, we've got a special offer, especially for podcast listeners, meaning you can choose any of our 3 membership tiers for 50% off the usual price. Starting at just £39.50 for a full year, you can get Which magazine delivered direct to your door. For the same price, you could also choose a digital Which subscription, giving you access to all of our product reviews, the Which app, and the digital edition of Which magazine. What's more, you'll also be able to use the Ask Which service for personalised one-to-one buying advice. Or why not get a full access Which subscription for just £49.50 for a full year? Don't forget, that's 50% off the usual price. To join Which or to find out more, just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer. That's which.co.uk/podcast offer. Or click the link in the description for today's podcast for 50% off a Which annual subscription.